Hi everyone, it's me, Tim. Today I want to talk about my three classes in Pillars of Eternity. This comes from a question from George Muniz 8805 who asked, "Hey Tim, I watched a video by Josh Sawyer." What are you doing watching Josh Sawyer? Anyway, he said, "I watched a video by Josh Sawyer mentioning that you were the one who had the idea for the chanter class in Pillars of Eternity. Could you explain your thought process in designing that class? It's probably my favorite version of a bard in any RPG." Well, with a question like that, with that really nice compliment, I have to answer George's question. Just to be clear, I was involved with the Kickstarter, and I did work on the initial designs of actually three classes: the chanter, the cipher, and the monk. After we finished the Kickstarter and we all rolled up our sleeves and we have to make a game now because people have given us money, Josh did change some designs. He was the director, and I was pretty much busy doing coding. I would say once the Kickstarter ended, I was 95% a programmer. I focused on the spell and abilities. Anything that had an effect, what we called a status effect in the game, went through this tremendously large piece of code I wrote, which was the world's biggest switch statement with, and I'm not kidding, hundreds and hundreds of cases. In fact, the programmer who's working on the turn-based version of Pillars, I've been apologizing to him on a regular basis because he's had to go through my code and tease apart what's going on in this enormous switch statement. But anyway, let's dive into George's question. I'll start with the chanter. I loved the Bard class in EverQuest. If you played EverQuest, their Bard class was really cool. They had songs and musical instruments, and they could play multiple songs at the same time. It was called twisting. You'd start to play one song, and when you stopped, the song would keep going for a little bit, so you could then play another song and switch back to the first one before it faded out. And twisting two songs was not that hard. Twisting three songs was really hard. I had trouble keeping three songs up. I heard there were people who did four. I never did four. Anyway, it was really cool because it felt and worked so differently than Magic. I mean, Magic, you had a spell, you threw the spell, spell went off. But in EverQuest, you had to actively keep all these songs going so the effects would be felt either by your group or the enemies, because they had lots of cool songs that made people in your group run faster or heal, or did things like make the enemies take damage or do less damage. You could basically buff your party and debuff the enemies. I liked that so much, and I also thought bards fit really well into Pillars, kind of that retro system aesthetic, because there were bards in D&D, and we were looking at inspiration from Baldur's Gate. So I thought it worked really well. My original idea for them only had what ended up shipping as phrases that you could then loop and try to get multiple phrases going at once. Josh added the invocations, which were the cool effects you unleashed when your phrase counter got built up high enough, which is a cool way of, you had to start with the phrases and every now and then you could unleash a really cool invocation. And they all had really cool names too. But that was all Josh. For the cipher, this is interesting. I had to look through my notes on this. My cipher was based on an Esper class. It was called the Esper in Wildstar. I have a class video, by the way. I'll link it below. In fact, I have a whole Pillars of Eternity development video, and I'll link that in the description as well. But if you look at the Wildstar class video, you can see that I had this idea for an Esper. And how they worked is they built up focus power by doing attacks, and then they could use that focus power to power their really cool spells. The original design that I wanted to do for what was the cipher in Pillars was that the cipher had to stay focused on one target. That's why I like the idea called focus. And as long as they continued to attack one particular target, one particular enemy target, their focus would build up bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they could unleash an effect. And it didn't necessarily have to be unleashed on the target. This idea was scrapped primarily because it proved really restrictive on the player to have to only attack one thing, especially if you were attacking something and then it died, like someone else in the party killed it. You're like, oh, I was on my focus, I was building up. But also, it was easy to accidentally switch, especially if it was a real time game and you were attacking things and maybe you just switched targets. Maybe something started attacking you and you switched targets to it. So that got removed once we started playtesting, but I still think the idea of building up focus to then power your really cool spells was a great idea. And then the third class was the monk. And again, this was based on a class that I had originally done for WildStar called the Shadow Monk. And that never made it into the shipping version of WildStar. But I liked it so much, I wanted to use it again. I thought the design idea was really cool, which is having a class that's powered by the damage they're actually taking. So, like the cipher, the more it would get into combat and do damage and build up focus simultaneously just by doing attacks. The monk was the exact opposite. Every time the monk took damage, we made this thing called the wound system. So, when you took certain points of damage, it would convert into a wound. I mean, you still have the damage too, but the wound was something that you kept, whether or not your damage got healed, which could happen in other ways. Those wounds then powered the monk's cool abilities. You had an ability that needed you to have 1 or 2 wounds, 3 wounds. What I loved about it was monks not wearing armor makes total sense in a system like this because they want to take damage. Putting a monk in plate armor prevented them from getting wounds, which prevented them from using their cool abilities. And I love, by the way, that's just a personal, what's the opposite of a pet peeve? Trope? Design preference of mine. I love when the mechanics you make explain the reason why things are in the setting. Because I remember D&D, it said, okay, monks can't wear armor. And it gave no reason why a monk couldn't wear armor. You just had to walk around, in cloth underwear and go, hey, I'm a monk. This one, there was a reason you didn't want to wear armor. I mean, in fact, you probably could, but that'd be dumb because you're not going to get wounded. So I like when the mechanics are designed to make a class play the way it plays. Now, I'll be honest, Josh added a bunch of cool ideas to that basic wound idea. He added, abilities that monks could get where they could start the game. They could start and just use an ability to immediately gain some wounds, even though their hit points wouldn't have to change. Or to gain wounds over time, like every 3 seconds you get a wound that can be used to power an ability, even if you're not taking damage. That was really cool, and I think it made the class more fun to play as well. Anyway, my notes of that time are limited. That's all I can remember from making those 3 classes for Pillars of Eternity. But I hope, George Muniz, I hope that answered your question.